Welcome to this episode of the Fireside Chat. Today we're going to be talking about a game that's origin is as old as me, give or take a month, and well, its author is probably at least thrice as old. But we're talking about the original Fate of the Norns RPG from 2012, the print book, and basically the 1993 first manuscript, as Andrew's just showing off right there. Almost 30 years old, which hurts a little bit to say, but it's fine.
It's going to be 30 years old next year. Wow.
Yeah, 1993 was almost 30 years ago.
This beauty was actually printed. These are all stamped and numbered. Every single one of these. So we've got a limited print run that we did of these. And this is, I'm holding number 43 from our limited stock that's left. These guys were printed back in 2012. That kind of started the whole thing, the whole Kickstarter run afterwards. This is
So when were they written?
These were written back in 92 on WordPerfect. Yeah. So I'll show the layout on the inside. If anyone worked with WordPerfect back for Windows 3.1, you can kind of recognize a little bit of the type of layout that you would have seen. Because we went straight with those original files.
I'm getting closer to the camera.
And this is all black and white artwork on the inside. So
good old free artwork too, huh?
Absolutely. We had no budgets back then. This was pre-Kickstarter. I didn't even know what Kickstarter was when we ended up doing this. Yeah, it was 20 years rolled around in January 2012. We had some fans start emailing me like, "What are you doing to commemorate 20 years of Fate of the Norns?" I'm like, "Wait, what? 20 years?" And then we decided to print this bad boy. Man, I was so happy when this thing arrived in the
mail. So, out of curiosity, after all this time, why Vikings? There's a bunch of different mythologies out there. It's just
why Vikings? Well, I'd have to go back to what we were playing in the late '80s, just the very start of the '90s. Second at D&D, AD&D. And there was a book that was part of the AD&D library, which was Deities and Demigods, or Legends and Lore, the second printing called Legends and Lore. And in there, they had all the pantheons of all of the world. So, the gods of Asia, like China, Japan, the Celtic mythos. They had Babylonian gods and Norse. And when we decided to make our own RPG, you know what? Let's pick one of these pantheons. We were all kind of like history or mythology buffs. Like, this was one of our favorite books. And I don't know, we just settled on Norse. It was just the one we gravitated to the most. Wasn't like Marvel Comics or anything like that made the reason. But yeah, we settled on that, and where we were at the time was Concordia University that had a nice little library building, and in there were a bunch of books by the Brothers Grimm and a bunch of other professors like Dumézil from France that had we had a ton of books on the Vikings in there that we started doing research on, and we try to make it as authentic as we can. But I mean, I look back at this, and this is still like light compared to the stuff that we did with Ragnarok afterwards.
Well, I mean, it was a starting point, right? So, and like if I remember correctly, also I didn't even use like runes yet at that point, right? Looking back, the original 1993. So like, what exactly was the systems that he used?
We used 2d10 percentile.
Oh wow!
So
nice.
Yeah, we were like, oh, are we gonna go d20? And then we had a couple of people that wanted to like learn to play RPGs. Like, what could be the most intuitive? And they were like, well, percentile. It's the easiest thing to wrap your head around. Like, what's my percent chance of succeeding at something? And then there was also one guy that was helping design some of the archetypes that was a huge Rollmaster fan, and that was all percentile. So we settled on percentile, but we wanted to do a little bit more with the roll. So when you rolled the 2d10, it wasn't just your to hit. which was the tens and the one digit. But the tens digit also ended up being how, like, where you hit on the body, and the ones digit was on like a secondary skill. So if you had a secondary skill like accuracy or a weapon specialist or whatever, you could trigger special effects based on the ones roll. And so there were like three things that you would derive from that one roll rather than roll three times. Because at the beginning we did have actually three rolls. Combat took really long time because it was like, okay, roll to hit. Okay, now roll on where you hit on the body, and then roll your other skill that might affect like assassination attempt or weapons mastery skill or whatnot. I said, oh man, this is really bogging combat down. Why can't we just do it all in like one roll? And so that was kind of the cool thing we did with the 2d10 system. But that lasted a while. Lasted a good 11, 12, 13 years. Yeah, 13 years. Because 93 to 2006. The runes only came around in 2006 for the core mechanics.
And so, like, what like pushed like the change in the thought process out of curiosity for that? Like, what what inspired the runes actually?
So around 2002, we were trying to like clean up the system and add some other nice optimizations to character creation, like life path system and like where your character's from, some personalities, like who you know, and I had a bag of Elder Futhark runes that I had ordered. Oh no, I had bought them from La Vallée de Coeur on Saint Denis, and yeah, I remember. And then I can use these. This is like really thematic. And as as I was using them to generate the tables for the life path system, I just kind of started scratching my head and going, I think there's a little more here than what these runes are letting on. You can do more than just like tables and drawing a random rune and going like, what's this symbol match up to? And around that same time, around the 2000 mark, if you remember, there was the Euro board game invasion, right?
Yeah.
And I had a bunch of friends that were like dropping RPGs, playing board games. What the hell are you guys doing? Dropping RPGs to play Monopoly or Sorry or Shoots and Ladders. And they're like, no, no, no. These aren't board games. You don't know what board games are. Let me show you a board game. And so they end up pulling out these games like Carcassonne and Settlers of Catan. And but back then, Puerto Rico, all these games that were winning awards in the late 90s. And I was like, holy cow. Like, these are impressive board games. Like, the rules and everything, the depth of play, the options, catch up mechanics, the no player elimination, like just the design that went into the player dynamics around the table was so well thought out that I was like, okay, we're no longer talking Milton Bradley like, crazy game. Hey, good evening, Battle Raid. How are you? And so then I said, okay, if I'm going to be looking at the dice and the runes for this potentially switch over from core mechanic, let's forget looking at mechanics. I started reading the designer diaries of these board game designers, and I said, let's look at the player dynamics around a table, because that's what they were doing when they were designing the board games. What is a healthy player dynamic around a table? And then after they put a list of what are our objectives for how we want our players to interact, how do we want our players to interact with the game and drive it to a successful, climax at the end. Well, then let's build the mechanics to reinforce that. And that's where the runes ended up coming in afterwards, is really to reinforce a kind of a mission statement of how the dynamics should be, less about the numbers and number crunching and lookup tables and all of that stuff, and really more about the player experience. Let's keep the people really, really like in the narrative, in the action, and the runes, because they're not so driven in terms of numbers and lookup tables, can reinforce that. And it's less about asking the dice for permission if something happens. It's more about choice. How do I want to do something? And drive it forward. And so that's pretty much the tipping point that I saw between 2002 to 2006. So this book then became kind of morphed into what you guys know as the core rule book of Ragnarok, shirt on the cover. But by no means was that an easy or straight journey. It meandered all over the place.
Of course, and like it was an experiment too, right? So that's like part of it as well. Now, like spinning back to the 1993 book, like what was like the archetypes that you actually had available back then? So like I'm sure some of them translated later into the Ragnarok books, but like I actually never got a chance to even flip through one of these books before.
So
So
surprisingly, I would say you would find pretty much all of the ones that you have right now in the core rulebook and Denizens of the North. Especially in the core rulebook, you see that there's the five that you start with, and then there's that little chapter right afterwards that talks about the ones that didn't make it into the core rulebook. That's pretty much what you found in this book right here. So you had the Bardrengir, you had the Stalo, the Scythe Kona, the I think the only things that didn't make it are things like the Son of Fenrir didn't make the conversion, and then what we ended up having in here was also the Gothis, which were the clerics of the various gods. And each one of them was almost its own archetype. So if you were a Gothi of Frigga or a Gothi of Thor, you were completely like your own class almost. And so we tried to replicate that as well with in Lords of the Ash, because we didn't want to go overboard and really make them all that like their own archetype. But we have those slot boards where you put in those 3x3 boards into your 7x7, kind of make them a little bit more distinguished based on the gods that you choose. But this went really, really like down the rabbit hole in terms of you're pretty much running another archetype by choosing god.
okay, and I mean like so that actually doesn't sound too far different to what you did like in Lords of the Ash even. So I'm sure was there any like mechanics that were inspired when you were translating those over or like
Um, well, like what I'm saying is that most of the archetypes remain the same, and the mechanics we tried to keep as close as possible. But the differences were in the '93 edition, everything was linear, so you would have a linear progression as you would put points into your class skill or your archetype skill. You'd have a linear progression. You'd unlock this and this and this. Whereas in Ragnarok, what I wanted to change was I didn't want, okay, you've been playing a Scythe Kona for 3 months, and I've been playing a Scythe Kona for 3 months, and we have the same build. We've leveled up the same way. So this is why we went with that board setup in Ragnarok, is you can now progress in any direction out of the center and now build your character very differently from other people. So that was a different of approach to the mechanics in it that I wanted to game. So
Mhm.
it didn't feel like in D&D where it's like, oh, I'm a seventh level paladin. Oh, you're a seventh level paladin, or pretty much the same.
Okay, fair. All right. So we kind of got the archetypes, though. I'm curious, like, was the setting exactly the same too, or like, did you basically
Oh,
just completely shift back then?
so back then we were just doing the research on the history and mythology, and we did not have the bandwidth. I mean, we were just scratching the surface of the research. So we didn't research in terms of the geography or the time periods of where the Viking kings were and where the kingdoms were, invasions and things like that. So the world is almost like a fantasy world that is inspired by Viking history. So you'll find a map of Iceland, but also like everything on there in terms of the cities and the surrounding areas. It's all fictional cities, fictional kings, but with a healthy dose of just infusion of the Viking aesthetic. Um, Whereas in Ragnarok, did a ton more research throughout those years, and we brought in, okay, if you're in the 10th century and you're in this part of the world, well, we've got the kings and the struggles of that period in history. So it's a lot more historically accurate. Uh, this guy over here is more, I guess, Fate of the Norns, fantasy world inspired by uh, Viking.
Okay. Okay. Still sounds pretty interesting nonetheless. And so how long did you play test it?
It felt like it was always in test playing. To tell you the truth, I mean, it. I think it took about a year to get it into a playable state. So 92 to 93, maybe just kind of sitting down and kind of knocking out like what are the attributes we want, what are the skills we want, what are the classes that we want, and then it feels like the next 10 years, honestly, 10 years was all test playing. It was we were always coming up with new stuff, and that was part of the fun because everyone would that would play with us would contribute, like creating some sort of like archetype or set of spells or something, and they would show up to the weekly game, and it was almost like a challenge of how badly can I up someone by making something extra broken. And we'd all like laugh like hyenas. What the hell were you smoking when you designed this? There's no way. No, no, no. Nerf, nerf, immediate nerf.
Okay, okay. So I mean that's I mean that sounds familiar too, even to when we were like doing some testing, but
But
yeah,
this
I
was
guess that's
early design. Like none of us were game designers at the time, right? Like we didn't have anything under our
well,
belt
you
in
gotta
terms
start
of
somewhere,
anything
right?
published,
And
right?
like the only place you gotta start is you gotta start designing games, and you're
Yep.
gonna make some mistakes, and you're gonna make someone who can summon an army of snakes. I don't know. I'm assuming druids would have been broken, so
Yeah.
just a quick, teeny tiny throwback, but that's fair. That's fair. So what made it into the print book? Which manuscript?
I guess the manuscripts that made it into the print book in 2012, we had a couple of choices. We could have gone with the 2002 version of the game, which was the one with the
Okay.
life path system. But really, when I talked with the guys that originally like helped put this together back in the heyday, I said, if we're gonna put a book just for the sake of saying, it's our 20th anniversary, get something into print, maybe we should just do our original manuscript, like just the very, very, very first one, before we added all the other stuff, just to kind of get that still snapshot of this is where it all started back in 90. And so that's pretty much where the vote went. So um, that's what we settled on. So the print book that got printed in 2012 is the 93 manuscript, not any of the editions. So we do have manuscripts from like later snapshots of the Fate of the Norns game, but those that haven't made it. So we really have just the 96, and then I guess the 2002 never made it into print. There's a 2006 that never made it into print, and then our Kickstarter was like a 2012 game. So there's a couple of editions that are still, for posterity's sake, maybe one day for an anniversary, shits and giggles, we'll put them into print.
I mean, that would be pretty cool. A
What does
nice
chat
little
think?
like
Should we take
throwback.
some of our old manuscripts and put them into print and put them out there?
We'll give you an
Oh,
opportunity.
whiskey tasting, good stuff.
Yeah, 8 different kinds of whiskey. I'm actually legitimately jealous.
Nice.
Here I am sipping on kombucha.
I'm just drinking a water.
Yeah, sure, sure you are. I don't believe. If you're drinking water, there's something wrong in the world. So, I guess my last question would be: is what artists contributed to this? Because I know you have some free art in there.
It's all free art, so we had absolutely no art budget. When I found out how much it cost to just print books, and we didn't know about Kickstarter at the time, I was just like, okay, let's just scour public domain. So I found like Arthur Rackham and Dolman and a whole bunch of these artists that had done some Viking art, um, you know, 100, 200 years ago. And I tried to get the highest res stuff I can get. And that's what this book is full of. And the funny thing was, as soon as this book came out, like we didn't even realize we had a huge fan base that ended up buying up the limited print run that we had put out pretty quickly. And then people were like, "Okay, when's the next book coming out?" And then we're like,
What?
book? The next book means we need to hire some artists. We have no money for artists." Um,
You
so
can't just keep using the same free art. They're gonna be like,
that's it. I think we packed in this book. Pretty much had all of the free art. So, yeah, we discovered Kickstarter soon after that. That's what getting fast into your hands.
and then like the drastic change, of course. Like the art is what drew me in initially to, well, actually accidentally showing up on the wrong day, but that's a different story.
I
But
love the way we met you at the back of Gamers Vault. You should share that with chat. So we're playing at the back of our local gaming store, and Aaron comes busting through into the back of the store, going, "Is this the D&D game?"
yeah, so I used to work night shift, right? So my Wednesday was your Tuesday, and so I would always get confused on the days of the week. So I show up expecting to join the adventuring whatever, and then I just see that they're playing an RPG game and they don't have any dice or anything. So I'm like, what are you guys doing back here? He was like, oh, we're playing an RPG. I'm like, but where's your dice and stuff? He's like, oh, we don't use dice. We use runes instead. And I just sit down like, okay, give me a character sheet. I don't care. How does this work? Like, basically, well, I did politely first ask. I was like, do you have a seat available? Can I just join? But yeah, it was instantaneously like, I'm sorry, no dice? That sounds absolutely fantastic. And that's the RNG of RPGs is one thing that's always kind of gone into me, but it's just, but also the detriment of HP. But anyway, I'm getting into a rant.
But that was a long
More
time ago. That was what, 2013, 2014 we met?
about, yeah, that would be correct. So it's give or take about,
Years of adventure.
geez, it's already been 10 years now, huh? Damn.
Yeah. And as you stated at the beginning of the stream, you're as old as this game.
Yeah, I was there for the 20th anniversary. I think about it. That's literally when I first showed up. Holy shit. Well, I love this game, and I love a lot of the things that come from it. And well, school.